everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Cagnetta. I am proud to have here with me today a man who probably needs no introduction here in South Florida, of course, because he is a former journalist for the Sun Sentinel, a Pulitzer Prize-winning public service journalist that I used to admire a lot. And then he kind of flipped his career and went to be the food critic for the Sun Sentinel. And now, of course, he's the eater, talker, writer, co-host of The Lunchbox, moderator of Let's Eat South Florida. My good friend now, Mike Mayo. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Andy, it's a pleasure and an honor, and I feel like I love these mugs. It's like comedians in cars with Seinfeld.
There you go. That's
coffee.
the thought
I'm
process.
Coffee with Cagnetta. This is a true honor, but it's really nice to be here.
It's great to be here, too. And I was mentioning your career. You've had a long journalist.
Weird career.
A weird
long,
career.
strange trip, as some of the Grateful Dead heads might say.
Yeah, tell us about it a little bit.
All right. Well, I was a ink-stained wretch for a while, and now I'm one of those, I hate the word influencers, but that's, I guess, what I am.
You are an influencer.
And I hate the word foodie. I hate the word influencer, but I just call myself an eater and a raconteur, and I'm still considering myself a journalist because I'm curious. I'm naturally curious, and I guess that's why I first got into newspaper journalism way back. I started writing when I was in my high school, Stuyvesant High School in New York City,
Wow.
the Stuyvesant Spectator. And actually, the first published piece I ever had was a restaurant review of an Italian restaurant in New York. And I don't know if any of the high school kids knew or cared. They were mainly eating, Big Macs at McDonald's. But no, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I would get into law, and then I thought I'd maybe get into international diplomacy. I went to a place called Tufts University up in Boston, and basically I stumbled around, and I also worked for the newspaper at Tufts called the Tufts Observer. It was a weekly newspaper. Tufts was a strange place because it didn't have a journalism program. You could not get a journalism degree there, but they had two newspapers, a daily and a weekly. And the people that worked on the daily were completely insane. They had no lives. And the weekly people like us were only half insane because we only had to pull two all-nighters a week to put the paper to bed.
Right.
And I just fell in love with newspapers. When I had a long commute to high school every day, I would read like 3 of the newspapers and, on the trains in New York. And something about doing something different every day, always something new happening, that intrigued me. So I veered into that. I got an internship at the Boston Globe. I got into, which at their sports department at the time was just like an all-star collection.
Sure.
And next thing you know, I did graduate with a degree in Soviet and Eastern European studies. I studied a little bit of Russian language, history, politics, culture. But basically everything I learned in college, this was at the time where communism and the Soviet Union was collapsing. So everything I knew was rendered useless by the time I graduated. So I became a sports writer.
There you go. In Boston.
In Boston. Well, I started off as a paid intern at the Globe. They liked what I was doing, so they kept me on kind of for a year after I was technically graduated. And then I got a full-time job in Spartanburg, South Carolina for the Spartanburg Herald-Journal covering sports. And then I got a phone call out of the blue from a guy that I never met and didn't know named Fred Turner. He was the sports editor here at the Sun Sentinel in South Florida, legendary guy. And at the time, I had been applying to big papers around the country, and I got rejected by, all the big boys. And I got 30 rejection letters still sitting in a box at home.
There you go.
But one of the people I never applied to was the Sun Sentinel and Fred. But a place that I applied to in Maine, the editor used to work at the Sun Sentinel, forwarded my clips to him. Fred liked them, and he's a tremendous spotter of talent. Not that I'm talented, but like Mitch Albom and guys like Bill Plaschke, and of course Dave Hyde's been there forever.
Of course.
But he had a great stable of sports writers, and he calls me up one day in Spartanburg. He goes, "Mike," I go, "Yeah." He goes, "This is Fred Turner down in South at the Sun Sentinel, Fort Lauderdale." I go, "Okay." He goes, "I'm gonna hire you. You just got to give me a little time." And I was like, okay. And sure enough, 6 months later, flew me down, had an interview, and in June of '89, I got a job as a Cubs sports reporter and spent 13 years in sports, got bored with that, then went over to hard news and politics.
Right.
And after 14 years of writing about the same silliness with between our legislature and local politicians getting in trouble and dumb people doing dumb things, I said, you know what? The opportunity arose to take the restaurant and food job when the previous critic, his name was John Tanachuk.
Yeah, I remember
guy,
him.
and unfortunately he passed. Like soon after he took the buyout, he got cancer and died. But I just raised my hand. I've always been passionate about food, and so I just said, hey, what are you doing about that food critic job? And the editor at the time, who was in charge of features and restaurants, Gretchen Day Bryant, who just yesterday was named executive editor.
Yes, she was.
I've been a long time, colleague, friend of Gretchen. I've known her 35 years, so congrats to her for getting the big
Absolutely.
gig. But when I went in, I said, hey, I'd like to, I'm interested in the job. She goes, what do you know about food? And I said, just looking. I've been eating for 50 years. And kind of, even though I'd already had one of the best gigs at the paper, being the local Metro columnist, they gave me kind of like a semi-tryout where I was writing reviews and also writing news columns. And they said, hey, we like the way you do this. You have a different kind of style. I didn't bring that, highfalutin gourmet kind of thing and more of an everyman perspective. And it just fits. I love it. And you can tell I could talk about food all day long.
Yeah, and I think that comes through. So after you've kind of cycled out of the Sun Sentinel, you wound up with Let's Eat South Florida.
Yeah, well, the genesis is basically we started Let's Eat South Florida. The Sun Sentinel, basically it was me, Gretchen, and another editor there named David Schutz. We saw that these Facebook groups started proliferating. This was in 2018, and there was a very popular one in New Orleans, which is obviously a great food town.
Sure.
And Gretchen was very friendly with Ann Maloney, who is the kind of features editor at the New Orleans Times-Picayune, a newspaper which doesn't even exist anymore. But they started a group there called NOLA Eats. It became popular, and Gretchen said, hey, why don't we start something like that? So it was basically the three of us just hatched, the rules and the ground rules, and we hit a button on Facebook in October of 2018. So I was still at the paper at the time. And next thing you know, here we are, almost 180,000 members, and it's become a real force. And I took a buyout from the Sun Sentinel in 2000, coincidentally, right at the time COVID was starting. I took it for personal reasons because at the time my mom was sick and I was taking care of her. And so it really had nothing to do with COVID, but you couldn't have asked for better timing for a food critic because all the restaurants closed that year.
Right.
So it ended up being kind of kismet. And because I left on good terms with the paper and I still have a lot of friends there, they kind of let me stay on as the kind of admin and eater-in-chief. And I love it. I love mixing it up with people on the internet. I love it because... And it used to be, newspapers and mainstream media was, we'd be the gatekeepers of information, and we would speak from on high. And then people would write a letter to the editor, or then became the time where we'd have comment threads. But it wasn't really, a back and forth. And it was like, yeah, I'm considered the expert, but the Facebook group is really neat because it allows everybody to kind of contribute and look, it's a big area. There's a lot of restaurants, and we don't know about everything that opens. And some of the, obviously, the higher price places, they are able to afford publicists, and they send us, press releases. But I love finding the little hidden gems and the hole in the walls. And that's where, when you have a Facebook group like this, you could find out about a neighborhood joint or something that's very modest out in, along 441. And so it was kind of a free flow of information. And then it's also better than Yelp in that Yelp can, well, I don't want to even get into Yelp, but again, if somebody writes a review, and it was never meant to be another Yelp, let's say.
Right.
It was meant to be a place to just share about good places, and I always wanted to accentuate the positive, because really, who wants to hear about every little nitpick? But the people are going to do what they're going to do, but the nice part is there's that interchange on the threads where people could say, well, I went to this place and it was great, so maybe it was just a one-off. And then when you see a lot of those, you know that maybe the post isn't, completely accurate. So it's been a lot of fun just adminning it, and the paper and I, we have a great symbiotic relationship because it is a lot of work to admin a group of 180,000 people. We get, oh my God, over 1,000, probably 1,200 posts a month. We have to sift through them to see they're rules compliant, and then
Right.
we end up posting probably about 50 a day. So there's probably about 600 posts that get in there in a given month, and some of them just take off, and you see what goes on there.
No, we do, and we'll talk about my post in a few minutes. But I do want to talk about the lunchbox a little bit because you've kind of spun that off to do a live, right?
Yeah, and so it's wonderful as somebody who was a long time scrivener and somebody who would have to craft these 1,000 or 1,500 word pieces for the paper, whether or something, whether it was a sports column, a news column, a restaurant review. Writing is agony. You've got to make sure you've got the right tone, the right word. You rewrite things, and for me, I wasn't a quick writer, but I was a careful writer, and also known as a clean writer. When I would send it in, the copy was clean. It didn't need a lot of reworking.
Right.
But that was pain. And when I sit and do this, I could get a lot of information out in a broadcast setting. I did a lot of TV and radio work when I was at the newspaper on all kinds of forums, everything from the Golf Channel when it first started, when I was a sports writer and golf writer. And then I was on the This Week in South Florida with Michael Putney a lot of times when I was a news columnist. So I had a lot of broadcast communication experience. And it's just something that is a way to blend all these things and all the all the components that I've assembled throughout my career into a daily thing that is both informative and entertaining, and also I think supportive. I want to be positive about the hospitality industry. I have so much respect for these people. They're totally insane, to kind of sink their life savings sometimes into an endeavor that has a high failure rate, that has long hours, and all to be able to feed people and make people happy at big occasions. And so I love doing this, and I guess I need, as a daily newspaper person, I can't just do something once a week or once a month. I need that rhythm of doing something every day that gives me a little bit of a schedule and a purpose. And so now we do this lunchbox 5 times a week, and sometimes more because we like to get around. And it's just a great way to spotlight local restaurants and restaurateurs and entrepreneurs, and it's been just a lot of fun. I'm having a blast.
We could tell, number one, and I've been lucky enough to be on the lunchbox a couple of times already, and we'll talk more about how we're doing that in a minute. But I do want to thank you for something, because I think it's important. You highlighted how hard this business is, and these entrepreneurs are out there, and they're trying to make it in the world, and you've given them a lot of grace. And I think you've taught the almost 200,000 users about having a bad meal or about giving them grace when they first open.
Yeah, it's about fairness, and it's like, look, I know we live in an instant gratification era, and we have all these, review sites and platforms now, and everybody thinks they're a critic. But in order to really be, like you said, it's about grace and fairness. And when I was at the paper and I was a professional restaurant reviewer, I would go maybe stick my nose in the door of a place in the first couple of weeks, maybe have a drink at the bar, check out the vibe. And then I wouldn't really have my first meal there. My rule of thumb was give them at least a month, because everything is a S show for the first couple of weeks.
Sure.
And, even, the most polished places need a little bit of time. And so I wouldn't eat my first meal for 4 to 6 weeks, and I wouldn't write a review until 2 to 3 months after a place opened, in most cases, because they make changes. There's tweaks. There's, and then, those words, they had more power back in the day when newspapers were more widely read.
Right.
But, they were powerful. They could sink a business, and that's a heavy responsibility, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. And to that effect, there was a lot of, I ate a lot of meals at places I never wrote about, especially mom and pops and independents that might be just mediocre to bad, but I didn't want to be the one to plunge the knife in their back. It would be like they'd sink or swim on their own eventually. Now, if it's a big name chef or at a high, profile place like on Las Olas with big backing, and they, my rule of thumb was if they could afford a publicist, then they're fair game to get skewered in a review.
Right.
But if it's a little mom and pop, I'm not going to be the one that says this place stinks and I would never go back. But let the market sort that out. So I tried to have a little bit of grace and fairness when it came to that. But I was known as a pretty honest and sometimes, quite frankly, brutal reviewer because that's how you maintain integrity with readers.
Right.
And now my role has shifted because I'm not getting paid by a paper to be honest with readers. I am in business for myself, and I want to weed out. I can't ignore the bad, but if you notice what I do on the group when I post something, it's mainly positive,
Right.
something that I found that I really like, or giving, a tip of the cap to somebody who does a really great job where I've had a really nice meal. Like, for instance, this place up in Boca called Lock Bar that I had
I was just about to say, you gave kudos to someone that you kind of skewered
exactly
back in the day, and you were talking about having oysters there.
right. When they first opened, and again, this was a glitzy place. They spent $3 million on the build-out, beautiful spot, and they build themselves as, like an oyster bar, and also have this great crab cakes, fried chicken. It's a Maryland-based outfit that opened it. But if you're going to open an oyster bar with like 12 different varieties of oyster, you got to have a staff that knows how to shuck them and serve them properly.
Right.
And they didn't. I mean, I went there for 2 meals, and both times the oysters, they didn't cut the bottom little, they
Right.
call it the adductor muscle, so it
Right.
slides out easily. There was some sand and grit in them, and that's just a training issue and getting
Right.
people in the right way. But I kind of slammed. I deduct a lot of points because it was expensive, and you're expecting,
Right.
something that's good. And again, it was 3 months after they opened that I wrote the review, gave them a chance to correct, and I kind of gave them a slam. But now the nice part is I could go back and revisit and say, hey, this place, they've been around for 5 years, and they're getting it right now, and it's all great. So that's the fun part of this group.
So let's talk about that because, a real big, quick backstory about how we met, right? So again, you're a guy who likes to do good things in the world, in our community. And I forget how either I heard that you liked what we were doing with the pasta dinner, or someone gave me a tip off saying, hey, they kind of like what you're doing. And I said, well, would he be willing to donate a lunch
with Mike Mayo?
a lunch with Mike Mayo? So we did that, and the backstory was we did that for a few years, and someone who bought the lunch eventually is now your significant other.
Yeah, I've moved in with her, and she'll be cringing because she's a very private person.
She is. That's why I'm not.
And she says, "You live your life out loud." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm an open book." And
Right.
but no, but that was really nice that I've gone to I donated a couple of years.
Yes.
One time, somebody else bought it, and we had a nice lunch with a couple and all that. But this time, it was a woman who was single, not married, and I didn't approach it as a date. We had a very professional lunch, but we seemed to hit it off. And then we drank a bottle of wine. It was at Andy's Live Fire Grill,
Yes.
which is no longer in business, but Anthony Bruno's great place that now is that BKK Thai, which is also doing a bang-up job.
Really?
They're doing great. Yeah.
Okay.
It's become a new favorite of mine. But that we were sitting on the second floor. We had a bottle of wine. And at the end of the meal, I said, "This has been really nice. Would it be okay to maybe call you and we'll have dinner together?" And she said yes, and the rest is history. Thank you, Andy, matchmaker.
No,
Cagnetta.
well, I didn't mean to do that, but I think what and the end of the story is we became acquaintances and friendly enough to go back and forth because we both have a love for these businesses.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Transworld's obviously here to help sell businesses, but we want to see these iconic brands stick around. And so we mutually came up with the idea after. So I'll tell the quick story is that we were trying to sell Hot Dog Heaven, which is an institution here in South Florida, referred to me by the mayor of the ex-mayor of South Florida, Jack
Okay,
Seiler.
Jack Seiler's great.
Right. So he sent me Barry Starr to sell this business, and we were struggling. Over 18 months, we were trying to find the right buyer.
Because sometimes in my role, I see which businesses are listed, and there's a lot of businesses that just list themselves, not really intending to sell, just want to see if there's any
Right.
interest, what kind of number they get. But I saw that Hot Dog Heaven.
And we
was
had it for sale, but it was kind of under the radar, and Barry was getting frustrated. And we had actually run some radio commercials up in Chicago trying to find the buyer. It didn't work. And we decided, I said, Barry, I have one more shot. I said, let me talk to Mike and see if I can post this on the website. Because sort of breaking
We
the
have,
rules.
rules about,
Right.
no self-promotion. We don't want people buying, selling. But this was different,
This is different because we're trying to save an institution,
Yeah,
which
it's been there almost 50 years.
yeah, almost 50 years. So
Yeah.
we did it. We got a huge outpouring.
Isn't that great when something
huge?
triggers?
It just went viral. And Sun Sentinel put it on the front page of the paper. News picked it up, and it had over 200, almost 300 shares.
Right.
Not likes.
Right.
Shares.
Right.
I mean, this went ultra viral. We had multiple offers. And, we recently got it done, and now we have a great owner in Joe Barra.
And it shows the power of the internet and community. I mean, the Let's Eat South Florida, for all the little nitpicking and griping, and some
Right.
people go at each other, it is a community. It is mostly people, the silent majority are food lovers and local business supporters. And that just shows the power of a community like that, because you throw something out there, and next thing you know, you've got nibbles and interest and a way to keep this. It's a quirky little business, you got to admit. This little stand that
Right.
doesn't have much in the way of parking, and there's like one little counter. I love the vibe in there. It just reminds me of places in Chicago, or some little holes in the wall in New York. And when I'm just so pleased that we were able to find a new buyer to keep the tradition alive. And God bless the Stars. They are entitled to their retirement. They've worked long and hard, and just don't ask for ketchup. Well, I guess you could ask for anything. Barry would give you ketchup, but
He had the
remember,
ketchup out on the counter. But
earlier in days, when you would ask for ketchup, you would have that little squirt gun with the silly string, and he
Right.
would just go, "Here's your ketchup," and it would squirt. Like the silly string would come out. That was probably about 10, 15 years ago.
that's funny.
And I never reviewed Hot Dog Heaven. John Tanachuk, my predecessor, did, and he gave it the top rating 4 stars at the time, because
Wow.
he just appreciated what it stood for. So I am glad that we have new blood in there too, and I hopefully
He
they're
does
going to
well,
both
yes.
expand the hours, and also
already have, yeah.
and hopefully they'll. Expanding menu items, not a bad thing. If Joe's a New Yorker and he's going to put in kind of a New York dirty dog with the sauerkraut and the red onions, God bless him. I mean, that's I just like to see these places survive, because we don't have much in the way of history here. This whole town is not more than 100 years old. So being from the Northeast in New York, where you see places that have been around for 150 years, places like Peter Luger's, like, I want those kind of things to be able to sprout and take hold here. So.
Yeah, and sure, we love places like that. So you and I decided after this, I'm like, hey, we need to bring these places out. We need to bring these places out. We need to put them on the lunchbox, and we need to recognize them and get that name out there. So we came up with the Iconic Eatery Award.
Iconic Eateries of South Florida. So, like, as opposed to LESF, which is Let's Eat South Florida, we have IESF, which is Iconic Eateries of South Florida. And
and we gave the first one out.
Yeah. And the first one, we went to Southport Raw Bar, Buddy Sherman. Great story there. I mean, Southport just celebrated its 50th anniversary. Buddy started there a few years after it opened as a busboy. He came here from Canada and just came to Fort Lauderdale on a lark. And next thing you know, he's working his way off from busboy to manager to partner. And now, he's the principal managing partner of a business that's been iconic for 50 years.
Yeah.
And the fact that, we're able to spotlight him, and then hopefully he keeps it going. And if not, then somebody will be interested in coming along and continuing the tradition.
Yeah, we want to do that. And the second award went to the highly controversial,
Call it a polarizing place
of Tropical Acre Steakhouse, which I love Tropical.
I love the Studiali
And Jack
family.
and the Studialis do such a great job, and they have an extended family of people that have been working there for a million years.
They've been through 2 fires, and they've managed to rebuild and come back every time. And they treat people right. They do so much for the community that it doesn't get publicized. But like every year, he prepares lunches for these high school students. I think it's a week when they come back. But it's not just, instead of just giving them like a ham sandwich every day, he prepares these different meals every day, and like 200 of them. And he goes out there. Like, they do things. There was that one year where they rewarded teachers and said, come on in, we'll give you a free entree. and they got such an overwhelming response because it was publicized on the Let's Eat group and
There you
things
go.
like that. But 75 years in business, and Jack's getting older. Luckily, he still has sons, family that are willing to carry on the tradition. But there are places now which the children don't want to be involved in a business where they have to work 16 hours a day. And if not for being sold and having somebody that wants to continue it, these places might just, go by the wayside.
Yeah, and we don't want that to happen, and we certainly want to give others opportunities. And you listen, it doesn't always work out, and we hate when we see that happen. But we certainly want to give these iconic eateries the ability to continue on, and and it's funny because I think that maybe because of the group. When something closes, it's super highlighted.
Yeah.
And there's always the naysayers that everything is closing, that the economy is horrible. What was the one guy say? He's down in Miami?
Apocalypse. The apocalypse. Look, and negativity always seems to get more publicized or noticed than positivity because that's the nature. Look, as a daily newspaper guy, guilty. It's like, we don't write about things going right. Like, I went to the bank today and they made a deposit and it went through perfectly. I took a flight today and it landed. No, we write about when things go wrong. And people pay more attention to things that go wrong. It's the same nature of the algorithms. It frustrates the heck out of me because Facebook and all these social media platforms, when somebody's griping about, a service charge on a check, that gets distributed.
What do you call them? The check people?
Oh, the receipt freaks.
The receipt freaks.
When they post a picture of the receipt and they said, I am outraged by this, but the algorithms recognize more people respond to that and comment on that than if I write something like, hey, there's a great new Portuguese restaurant that just opened in Pompano. Those will get like 3,000, reach as opposed to the receipt freak one gets 40,000.
Wow.
And that's just the nature of the algorithms. It's frustrating. So I do keep those because I want to keep the engagement there because the more engagement you get, the more the group posts get onto the main feeds of people. The way these platforms work is slightly frustrating, but you learn to play the game because you want to keep it going.
And we listen, if anybody's out there, of course, sign up for Let's Eat South Florida. It's a lot of fun.
But getting back to your point, so the apocalypse, yes. So the closings get more attention and engagement than maybe an opening, but people got to realize you got to take things in context, and this is what's lacking a lot when people are talking about apocalypse and this. Look, I've been a resident here of 35 years and always loved going out to eat. I was, I've been actively engaged as a kind of professional food writer, journalist for nearly 10 years. Restaurants come and go every year. Restaurants close and restaurants open. Sometimes it's in the economy, the Great Recession of '08. Sometimes it's COVID. But the thing is, it always bounces back. And COVID shocked me. I thought there was going to be a lot more restaurants that went out of business. Instead, something unusual happened. Commercial rates for restaurants went up because so many of the places that had the restrictions in the north, the New York, Boston, Chicago places, all those restaurateurs came down here because we were a little bit more relaxed and we have open air seating. It was safer to eat outside. And so restaurants actually, a lot of them thrived. And the ones that went out, within 3 to 6, you probably could speak to this.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
I mean,
within 3 to 6 months, places were coming in and opening up. So the context is, all right, a restaurant closed. Is another one opening pretty quickly? What's the overall rate of restaurants, licensing in the county for a given year? And, maybe you've had, 800 licenses go out, and then another new 800 licenses came in. So is there a net loss? And some years there'll be a net loss. Some years there'll be a net gain. But I always see more and more restaurants keep opening up. More and more new developments and new retail centers are being built. So there's more restaurants, more population. That's the cycle of life.
It's going to work. And you see some streets, they get really expensive. Maybe some of the mom and pops go out, but they move. And we see these, I always point to Hollywood because Hollywood, sometimes goes up and then all of a sudden it's down and then there's a bunch of empty stores.
Hollyweird, I call it.
Yeah, I know. Well, I live there too.
Because,
so.
I've lived in the Dania Hollywood area a long time. I recently moved into Fort Lauderdale. But I mean, even if there's some areas that struggle,
but
There's always opportunity.
it gives an opportunity for the mom and pop restaurateurs or the chefs that come from amazing places.
Right.
And we're gonna mention one right now, because what I'd like to leave this with is, and it gives those up and coming chefs, or those chefs who want to break out on their own, that were at a top restaurant. It gives them the opportunity to be out in a place that is not normally traveled, and it becomes a destination. Yeah. And one of them is J&C Oyster, which they're doing
it's a crew, a bunch of chefs that worked at Q in Miami, which is one of my favorite restaurants.
Yes.
And actually, Raheem has been named executive chef of Q again, but he's still involved with J&C. They've created a great menu, some just terrific food.
Incredible food.
And Raheem is a creative force because he manages to wear many hats and trying to open all these different concepts all over. But the food is great. And it's on this end of Harrison Street that's poised for a comeback. There's a bunch of restaurants that are supposed to open. It gets a little bit frustrating. But what we're seeing in Broward overall is that as Miami-Dade becomes too pricey, like you said, the talent flows to a place that's a little, that's more affordable. And saw it in New York. There was a time where all the big major restaurateurs and highfalutin restaurants were in Manhattan. But then it got to a point where everything was so expensive there that the young innovators came across the bridge to my native borough, Brooklyn. And the next thing you know, some of these neighborhoods that you wouldn't set foot in 30, 40 years ago, like Williamsburg, Bushwick, Brooklyn Heights, they became a bastion of great dining and innovation. And, now you're seeing the same thing I think can happen here in Broward. There's opportunity in little pockets of where things are more affordable, and that's the nature of the beast. I love seeing the Catherine come downtown. Tim and Baloo is great, and he's James Beard Award. So there's it's a really exciting time to be a foodie. I hate the word, but to be an eater.
So give us some of your favorite places, and let's include some real kind of hole-in-the-wall mom and pops that people wouldn't normally go to. That
and I'm going to mention a lot of my sponsors because the way my show works is like I've been approached by people, and I was like, because I consider myself, still having some standards and credibility, So when I say Mike Mayo's Lunchbox approved, it means I really like the food and what they're doing. Luke's Seafood out in Davie, which is along University Drive, guy who used to work at Coconuts for 18 years, very talented chef.
I haven't been there yet.
Miami-born, Haitian background. Him and his wife, Roxy, who's from Romania originally. They opened up this little mom and pop, very, modest surroundings, but the food is terrific. His jambalaya is one of the best jambalayas in town. I love Luke's. Union Kitchen and Bar in Wilton Manors.
I love that place.
Roberto and Christy, again, another couple. They met working at the Boca Resort, at one of the high-end restaurants at the Boca Resort. Roberto's from Italy. He's an accomplished sommelier. And Christy, great chef, Peruvian background, but grew up in New Jersey. She's the chef. He's the sommelier front of the house. They do a terrific job.
Yeah, they do.
I love that place. And the wine list, interesting, affordable wines. You can get a great bottle of wine for $50. I love that. I love when they're not gouging. I'm a guy that loves wine, and I'm very frustrated when I see places that only have, they'll triple markup or they'll have the same, labels that we see over and over again. So I really get excited by a great wine list. Union Kitchen Bar, one of my favorites, the Catherine. Heritage, Reno is a nut that I love his food. We got a lot of good stuff here in Broward County.
Yeah, we do. It's a great place to be a foodie, as they say. And I hate that term too. Because
I call it fresser because I'm Jewish, Brooklyn, New York. Fresser means one who likes to eat, and so I call myself a fresser more than an eater.
Yeah.
And I love food. You can see. We could sit here and talk about it all day.
Yeah, we could. I mean, and I think there's plenty of, great places to get like certain things. Like I love Shenanigans and their wings.
Yeah.
I mean,
wings are great. Pat's a great guy. Been in business a long time. And
yeah, he's an iconic eatery too. So we'll have to get with Pat one day. But, Mike, thank you. I want to thank you, number one, and the whole Let's Eat South Florida and everybody at the Sun Sentinel. I mean, you really helped us get Barry Starr and his wife the ability to retire, and that'll continue on. It's great.
I like helping out people. It's weird because as a journalist, there's ethics, and you're not supposed to take sides, and you're not supposed to get involved. Now I'm in a role where I could be a little bit more active behind the scenes and do things and try to do the right thing for people. And I like being, like being positive, and I like being generous. And I think there's you could do a lot worse in the world than that.
I agree with you, and we're like-minded. So thank you. Thank you again for being here, and look forward to more iconic eatery awards, and we'll catch up again. I think everybody's going to love this episode, and appreciate it, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Great
Thank
to
you.
see you, Andy. Thanks. Oh, so and if anybody wants to join Let's Eat South Florida, real easy. You got to be on Facebook, but just do a search for the groups Let's Eat South Florida and just hit join and agree to the rules and be civil. And then as far as the lunchbox, again, we generally simulcast the show every day on the Let's Eat group. So if you just click on Let's Eat for the newest posts at about 1 o'clock every day, you'll see the show. Or go on to the I have a Facebook page. Just do a search for Mike Mayo's Lunchbox, and you'll see all the episodes that we've done. You can just stream down and click, and available for viewing anytime. Instagram, I'm at Mike Mayo Eats or Mike Mayo's Lunchbox, and I'm off X now. That's old news.
Yeah, I think so too. And shout out to Luby, who does a great job
And
of
Jeff Defo,
and Jeff Debo for being there
longtime
as well.
Sports talker
Yeah,
who
so-
joins us for our shenanigans too. So
That's
it's all
great.
good.
I want to thank Mike Mayo for coming in today. I really appreciate it. And stick around next time for another great coffee with Cagnetta. We'll have a great guest.